Today, we give you our way too early 53-man roster predictions. The Packers will have a few tough decisions to make come August, so let's take a look at how they put this puzzle together.
Yeah, I've been wanting this shit forever. I've been in the field with whatever they throw at me. Brush it off, pick myself up, moving on to the better. Okay. Hey. Yeah. Ain't no errors, baby, it's a new era. I wake up early feeling rich like I'm Kesha.
All right, everybody, welcome back into another episode of Sounds Gouda. My name is Jordan Olson, and my co-host and best friend over here is Rob Relf. So we just want to thank all of our listeners, new, returning, whatever. You've been very supportive, and we really appreciate that. So right now, we've hit our 500 sub mark. We're on our way to 600. If you have not subscribed to the show, or if you're a new listener and you like this content, please subscribe. It really helps the show a lot. But yeah, we're excited to be talking Packers football with you as always. Just a reminder that we do have new episodes every Wednesday and Saturday on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So jumping in, before we get to our 53-man roster discussion, recently, yesterday, and a little bit prior to that, but mostly after the George Pickens trade, the trade that happened between the Steelers and the Cowboys. If you weren't aware, George Pickens got traded to the Cowboys for a 26th third round pick and a 2027 fifth round pick in exchange. The Cowboys got George Pickens and a 2027 sixth round pick. So they did a little bit of a pick swap there, essentially leaving the Steelers without much besides DK Metcalf at the wide receiver position, which opened up this big discussion for, well, the Steelers need a wide receiver and who makes sense. And of course, the Packers are rich at that position right now. Maybe not rich in terms of, the number one guy, but rich in the Packers have a lot of dudes with potential. And, it was easy to turn to Romeo Doubs as a trade discussion piece. So the simple conversation came to, well, would you trade Romeo Doubs for a third round pick? And I've got some opinions on that, but I want to hear, Rob, what are your thoughts? If the Steelers came to you and you're Goody and they said, hey, we'll give you a third round pick straight up for this, would you make that trade?
Hard to give up the best hands on the roster. I know he does have the health concerns, so that's totally valid, and he's coming up on a contract for sure. And like you said, we just drafted Golden. We have Savion Williams in the mix, as well as some other, really good wide receivers, obviously. So if it's a third round pick, for that, absolutely. I would say yes, knowing the depth and the capital that we just invested in the draft for that position. If it's anything later than that, I say no. And while I do have some concerns, I do think Romeo Doubs did have the best hands on our team, like I was just alluding to. So that would definitely hurt a little bit, I would think. But third round pick is probably too good to give up, considering the draft capital, the other depth that we have, and you can't pay everybody too as well, right? And Goody liking to soak in and get some more picks for future value.
Yeah, this is a very complicated question for me. I spent quite a bit of time thinking about it, discussing with my dad yesterday too. If the Packers do what the Packers normally do, right? Building for the future, getting this draft compensation, the pick makes perfect sense. And then you throw in the fact that you're worried about Romeo's concussions, you're worried about, whatever that weird week off-season blip that we still don't have, or not off-season, in-season blip that we all still don't have all the answers to and never will, that week he got suspended and held out of practice. So yeah, on paper, I think it's easy. The conclusion that I came to, Rob, is that I think that if the Packers are all in on a Super Bowl this year, I think they have to keep Romeo on this team, at least for the start of the season, because you're putting a lot of eggs in the basket on counting on Matthew Golden being really good, and you don't know what you're going to get in Savion Williams, and he could be really good, but the fact of the matter is relying on, Dontavian Wicks then to be reliable for you.
Yeah.
Putting a lot of pressure on Matthew Golden. The beautiful thing about Matthew Golden right now is that he doesn't have all the pressure in the world on him because he's insulated a little bit. You trade Romeo, you're putting a whole lot of pressure on that guy to succeed right now. So I don't know. I feel like if now is the time to win a Super Bowl, like the Packers have put out there that we're going to compete right now, trading Romeo might not be in our best interest. A couple other thoughts there is why not at the deadline though? So let's just say, and Romeo's going to be playing for a contract. So let's just say he's lighting it up through the first 8, 9 weeks. There's a really receiver needy team, and you're going to get Christian Watson back in like week 12 or 13. So if the Packers have already had a good season, you've given Golden and Savion Williams a chance to get acclimated to the NFL. Maybe you like what you see out of one of those guys or both of those guys. You're feeling more confident that they can step up and take those snaps. Then you trade Romeo Doubs at the deadline. You probably can still get a 5th-round pick for him, and you've only got to survive a couple weeks until you maybe get Christian Watson back. But I feel like you're insulating yourself against injury, because if you trade Romeo and Matthew Golden gets hurt in week 4 and you're still without Christian Watson, now you're kind of really hurting at that position again. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah, I definitely understand the conversation and kind of balancing it out that way too as well. Yeah, you would have to see some production, right, from Matthew Golden and from Savion Williams and from the other wide receivers too as well. Like Wicks needs to catch the ball better,
Jalen
right?
Reed, we didn't
Absolutely.
really mention him in this conversation. If, right now you'd be making that trade guessing or assuming that Reed and Wicks and Golden are all going to make those jumps. The other interesting thing really quick, and we'll get to our 53-man roster prediction, is if you don't trade him, so, like I said, Romeo is going to be trying to play for a contract. That means a couple things probably. I mean, you can't control his health or concussions, so hopefully he stays healthy. But, you know, if he is upset about his position on the roster, he's not going to make a stink this year, because whether it's the Packers that are going to pay him or another team, him and his agent are going to know, like, we got to be good soldiers. And if we, hold out and do this, that's going to really hurt our value in the market this year. So, one, I don't expect to see any of that stuff. Two, he's going to be trying to play his heart out, and whatever target share he gets, he's going to be trying to ball out. So if he gives you a really good season, not next year, but the following year, you're going to get a pretty decent compensatory pick for him. So
Yeah.
if he signs a 3-year, $60 million deal, he played multiple years in this league as a number 2 wide receiver. He's being signed to be a number 2 on a team. You're probably going to get a 4th-round compensatory pick for him anyways in 2027. So
Yep.
it's not like you're totally not getting any value for him back. It's just not in 2026. So just some interesting things to think about.
I would have a hard time seeing Brian Gutekunst trading Romeo Doubs unless the deal got just that much better.
Yeah. So I don't know. Well, I'm sure there'll be more discussion about that, especially if a trade does materialize. But we'll see. Let's get into our roster discussion though. So Rob, for our listeners, for people that are following along with us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, we do have a visual that goes along with this. So if you want to see that, jump over to YouTube and watch it on there. But we are, just to kind of give you an indicator of what we got going on here, is we have a chart, and we have our players kind of plotted on here. So Rob and I had some discussion, and these are our initial feelings on the 53-man roster following the draft and guys we've added in the UDFA market. But guys that are in green, we think are going to be on this roster. Guys that are in green and in bold, we think are pretty much roster locks at
Locked.
this point in time.
Yep.
Yep. Guys that are in gold are guys who are going to be on the fringe, have the potential to be cut, re-signed to the practice squad. And then in a couple minutes, we're going to talk about the orange guys. And the guys in orange are guys that are going to be, have some heavy camp battles, probably vying for the final, 1 or 2 roster spots. And we'll tell you why we think that some of these guys are highlighted and who they might actually be competing against for a roster spot. But before we do that, why don't we go through our list position by position, and and share with you who we think's going to make the team. So Rob, go ahead and hit us with that.
We're just doing the green. Are we doing the green, yellow, and orange?
Yeah. So why don't we go ahead and give the greens, the guys that we think are going to make the rosters, and then we can come back to the back end of those position groups and kind of have some discussion from there.
Okay. All right. So starting up, this one's pretty easy, but quarterback. So in green and in bold. So locks, Jordan Love and Malik Willis. I'll go ahead and do running backs here. Green and in bold again for our listeners that aren't on YouTube, Josh Jacobs and Marshawn Lloyd. And then I'll go ahead and just hit wide receiver here real quick.
Offense, yeah.
Yeah, okay. In green and in bold, Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks, Matthew Golden, and Savion Williams. Moving on to tight end, and bold and green again, Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave. And then just in green, but not in bold, for some conversation, Ben Sims. But we still think he's going to be a roster lock. And then moving on to the offensive lineman, Rasheed Walker, Aaron Banks, Elton Jenkins, Jordan Morgan, Zach Tom, Sean Ryan, Anthony Belton, and Jacob Monk. Jordan, you want to hit the defensive tackle group?
Yeah, so starting with the defense, if the season started tomorrow, I think that Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, Carl Brooks would all be roster locks. And then, based on historical history and what Gouda likes to do with his picks and team needs, I think that Warren Brinson and Nazir Stackhouse would also be on this roster. At defensive end or edge, Rashawn Gary, Lucas Van Ness, Kingsley Engabari, and Baron Sorrell locks, with Brenton Cox Jr. also making the roster right now. Linebacker, Quay Walker, Edrin Cooper, Isaiah McDuffie are locks, with Tyron Hopper and Isaiah Simmons making the roster at this point in time. Cornerback, we're not even going to talk about whether Jair is going to be on this team or not. Until he's not, we're going to assume that he is at this point in time. But if he's on the team, he's clearly a lock. Keyshawn Nixon, Nate Hobbs, Carrington Valentine, and we have Javon Bullard listed as a corner. And our thing, he of course has safety versatility, and when you get to a place where you have injuries, he could be right back, filling in for Evan Williams in that group. But, we think that he's a slot corner right now, and that was his best position last year, in our opinion. Safety, Xavier McKinney and Evan Williams are locks, with Katano Ladapo and Zane Anderson also making the roster. And then, the three specialists, there's not really any competition here. I think it's pretty straightforward. We just gave Brandon McManus a nice contract extension, but Brandon McManus is our kicker, Daniel Whalen's our punter, and Matthew Orszczyk is our long snapper. So that makes up 48 guys out of 53 we think are going to make the roster up, 39 of which are locks. So, that really leaves us with about 5 open positions that we have room for discussion at this point in time. So I don't know why we got that typo or whatever next to the specialist column. I think it says 14. It really should be 5 positions that are up for discussion. So we'll go ahead and we'll fix that for you. But let's go in. Let's kind of hit the offense again and let's have some discussion. So remember, these players in yellow are players that are rostered right now on the 90, but we think will probably be cut or on the practice squad after they get cut. The players in orange are the ones that are probably warrant the most discussion, whether they were on the roster last year or we think that they're new additions, whether they're UDFAs or they're draft picks, and they're going to be competing to have a roster spot. So, I don't know, do you want to hit us with any conversation on the offense? Where do you want to start with that, Rob?
Yeah, well, before we were kind of just discussing or going back and forth about the running back, wide receiver kind of conversation as well. But from in here too, like we have Emmanuel Wilson and Chris Brooks kind of battling it out. We know, obviously, last year, Marshawn Lloyd getting hurt, for the majority of the season. Emmanuel Wilson and Chris Brooks stepped up beautifully too, as well, right? But if you're going to be keeping more running backs, you're going to have to be keeping less wide receivers,
Mhm.
And then over here on the wide receiver discussion, basically got Reed, Doubs, Wicks, Golden, and Savion Williams as locks. But, we did just sign McCole Hardman, kind of later on in the free agency period. But there's conversation for him, right? Like he's probably the punt returner, kickoff, guru or specialist on special teams, right? And we might touch just a little bit on special teams, but not go that far deep down into it. But to me, that seems like more of a battle for Bo Melton and Malik Heath. I could see McCole Hardman, kind of making it in that green spot, um, which leaves you that conversation of the running back. So how, like in your opinion, and I guess obviously this is the point of this discussion, which is way too early. You still have training camp and all that stuff to battle it out, right? But how are you kind of envisioning this, and what way do you think it would swing that makes sense for this roster?
Well, and and also in talking about the wide receiver position quick, I mean, we didn't haven't talked about it yet, but obviously in this scenario, we know that Christian Watson is on the IR to start the season. He has a place on this team later, so we don't necessarily have to take that into consideration when we break camp. Um, but know that, we may need an available roster spot for him on week 12, week 13, week 14, or,
Yeah,
maybe you don't need as many wide receivers because you're planning on having depth at the end of the season. Um, However, these injury things, you never really know how they're going to go. We could expect that he comes back in week 12 or 13, but maybe that never materializes either. So, just wanted to throw that out there. We haven't forgot about Christian Watson, but he's going to start the season on IR for this discussion. I like you said, I
it's hard.
running back is so interesting because if Marshawn Lloyd is healthy, right, he's a lock and he can do a lot of things for this offense. The question of the thing that we'll have to look at in camp is how much can he do some of those things that Emmanuel Wilson does, if because Emmanuel Wilson played really well. He had a great season. He's been in the system for a while. And last year, Emmanuel Wilson's role was really, hey, I just need a guy who can run the ball, who can get some tough yards. But he's more of a downhill straight line runner, right? We project Marshawn Lloyd to have a little bit more side to side jitterbug in him. He's certainly
Yep.
got speed.
Yep.
So if he can do some of the same things that Emmanuel Wilson can do, then I think it's a lot easier to lean into Chris Brooks as your do-it-all blocking specialist, and then you could stick with just 3 running backs on the team. But Chris Brooks, I think, brings a lot of value in the special teams unit as well, which we'll see how that factors in. I mean, all of these fringe decisions are going to have some special teams value
Yeah.
to them, maybe with the exception of maybe a 10th, ninth or 10th offensive lineman. That would be more of a depth case. But any third running back, any sixth or seventh wide receiver, any fifth linebacker certainly is going to need to play special teams heavily to make this roster. So those are my thoughts about running back. And we're going to pair the running back wide receiver conversation together in a minute. But what is your thought about the wide receiver room? We have our 5 locks, but where do you see Melton, Hardman, or Heath bringing you the most value? And if you were only going to keep 6 of the 6 wide receivers total,
Yeah.
basically leaving Melton, Hardman, and Heath in competition for one spot, who do you keep on this roster with the 5 that we've decided we're keeping already?
Yeah. It's McCole Hardman. I mean, Bo Melton has done great, right? Malik Heath, for when he's come in and provided really good production for us. But McCole Hardman, he's got the experience. He has the Super Bowl rings. Hopefully, he still has the speed. Don't really quite know, right? He's getting up there in age, and I think he's going to be extremely valuable on special teams. I know there's the conversation like Savion Williams, right? Like he's had that from that experience. I guess maybe that'll be more of a training camp discussion or battle or both, probably. And if Savion Williams just ends up just completely just taking the ball literally and running with it, then I could see McCole Hardman being a little bit more expendable. I mean, his contract wasn't that massive, so I mean, you wouldn't lose much if you did end up cutting him. I just think that they're going to like the experience. They're going to like the speed, and I do think that they're going to try and get him some reps on offense too as well. If anything, just emotion and to clear things out on the defense for to open up other wide receivers or running backs.
Yeah, I think I have a slightly different opinion. I don't necessarily think that they're married to the idea of McCole Hardman. I think McCole Hardman was always signed as the we didn't get any speed in the draft insurance policy. And clearly, by adding Matthew Golden, I think that that brings McCole Hardman's place on this roster more into question, right? Like the Packers have always leaned into keeping younger guys who have higher upside. We know what McCole Hardman is at this point in time, and he's a return specialist. He's really good as a wide receiver in the screen game. Can probably do some of those gadget things, but some of those gadget orbit motion things that you also maybe brought him in to do, that's what you just drafted Savion Williams to do as well for you. So I tend to think that they might lean. So then to me, if McCole Hardman, and I think the thing that he brings the most that none of these other guys have is the experience, the veteran leadership, and
Yeah.
maybe they really want him to mentor this roster.
So then I guess my question is, then you know where I'm going. Are you going with Bo Melton or Malik Heath then?
Well, then I think you got to look at those two guys' skill sets. They really like Bo Melton. They've even drawn up special packages and plays for him. So I still think they really like him. They also really like Malik Heath for what he can do in the blocking game. And now I think it'll come down to how good a blocker Savion Williams actually is in camp. If they show that he can do some of the blocking things that Malik Heath has done for them, the dirty work as the fifth or sixth wide receiver, I think that they stay with Bo Melton's upside in the receiving game. But Malik Heath has also had really dependable hands. He's had a couple plays for us. I don't know. It's going to be a really hard decision. We're going to let camp play that out. But as of, May 9th, as we're recording this, those are the things that we're thinking about in this discussion right now. So then if you stick with the skill positions on offense, then it really comes down to, well, if we really love Bo Melton and Malik Heath, that means we're keeping 7 wide receivers on this team. There's no way that we can keep 4 running backs. So then they might have to decide between Emmanuel Wilson or Chris Brooks are those wide receivers. So we'll come back at the end of this. Maybe we'll give a little we'll pluck a few guys in here and finalize the 53, but those are our early thoughts. Offensive line is a very interesting discussion, and I'll let Rob kind of take that. We've given you 7 locks. I feel very good about the first 7 guys. But if they're going to keep 9, there's a couple guys that are really in discussion here.
Yeah, well, Rasheed Walker, Aaron Banks, Allen Jenkins, Jordan Morgan, Tom, Ryan Belton. We put in here Monk, and we really liked from what Monk did from last year, and he's really kind of your only really true backup center to Elton Jenkins, too. So that would be another reason why he's, kind of in this green and bolded. But I mean, from there, it is literally a training camp feast. If you've all seen The Dark Knight, where he breaks the pool stick and says, "We're gonna have tryouts." I think that's what it's gonna be, honestly, right? Like we saw Telfort and Glover last year down the stretch in the playoffs, and it was absolutely atrocious. We do have Donovan Jennings too on here as well. We also know how Goody feels about his draft picks and John Williams. And what I was seeing from John Williams is that 7th round pick is a lot of really good things. If you've all tuned into our UDFA video, if not, shameless plug, go check it out. We have Tyler Cooper in here from Minnesota, and then JJ Lippy as well. So I think that this is going to be one of the most funnest. It's going to be one of the more funner. I'm probably butchering that. It's going to be an
We
interest.
speak well on
Yeah,
Sounds Gouda.
yeah, right. It's going to be interesting to watch this be, battling out in training camp. I think that the depth piece, as far as this goes, your 9, 10, getting on further on down, depending on who they end up keeping, if that's one extra spot. I think there's a lot of competition here, and I think that they're going to have them all fight it out.
Yeah. Here's my thoughts on it. I definitely agree that Goody loves his draft picks, and he certainly wants to keep guys in the system for at least a full year to give them a chance to develop through a second training camp before making any choices. To me, that means that he's probably going to protect John Williams.
Yeah,
My prediction would be that John Williams is going to make the roster as a ninth offensive lineman, right? So he's
yeah,
eighth on this list, but I think he's probably safe because I really like his upside a lot. He's a great pass protector. He's everything the Packers look for in an offensive lineman, and I think they're going to want to develop him. So then, between Kadeem Telfort, Travis Glover, and Donovan Jennings, a guy that they invested in as a UDFA last year, all right, we got to have one more on this roster for depth. Telfort, he kind of gives you that he's probably your best backup tackle in this option, and Donovan Jennings and Glover are more interior guys. I think we've seen what we're going to see out of Kadeem Telfort. Not that he can't get marginally better,
agreed.
5% better, but we're close to seeing what we've got out of him. He was a UDFA guy, obviously a project, so I don't know that there's a whole lot more upside there. I'm going to be honest, I've not liked Travis Glover for no other reason than I just I don't personally dislike the guy, but I don't see him as a long-term fit on this team. I hope, that coming back into year 2 that he's had a lot of development, but I wasn't super high on that pick to begin with. So,
Yeah,
but we haven't seen anything from Donovan Jennings either. Picking this ninth guy, I think does have, is going to be very interesting. If I had to pick it right now, even though we've seen maybe the ceiling from Kadeem Telfort, we have a lot of backup depth on the interior. And after Anthony Belton now, we don't have a lot of depth at the tackle position. So if I had to pick right now, I would say Telfort would be the guy because he would be your fourth tackle on this roster, where Glover and Jennings are probably don't really have that tackle versatility, or you don't really want them to be in that position.
yeah, and then we haven't talked about practice squad, but candidates, as well for practice
Mhm.
squad too.
So I'll put Kadeem Telfort as the ninth guy in here right now. And honestly, I don't think they'd have trouble slipping Glover, Jennings, or Cooper back to the practice squad and letting those guys develop for another year, or bringing them up in the case of injuries.
Well, on here too, though, Telfort would be your 10th.
Oh, is he?
Is yes.
One, two,
Yep.
three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. So he doesn't have to make the roster
So that
right
makes
now.
your discussion, your conversation or argument even better. You wouldn't even have to keep him. You just keep on John Williams, which is probably the better
Mhm.
case scenario, anyways.
All right. So, okay. Let's switch over to the defense for a little while. I think there's less discussion in terms of like back end guys that are going to make it, but
Yeah.
definitely a lot of discussion at defensive tackle and defensive end, because there is a numbers game. You can't keep 6 defensive tackles and 6 edge players and all the other players we're keeping on defense. So, you know, Colby Wooden is going to be battling for a spot with Warren Brinson and Stackhouse, but ultimately we think that he might be on the outside looking in. I think he's reached his potential.
Agreed.
No, I think there's more to Aaron Mosby, but I also think that Brenton Cox and then Sorrell are higher than him on the draft pick. But I kind of think those guys are competing against each other as an 11th defensive lineman,
Mhm.
because they're not going to be able to keep 12. And who knows, they might only keep 10, which both of them might be off of the roster at that point in time. So, what are your feelings around Wooden and Mosby? If you had to lean into one of those guys, who would you choose at this point in time, or would you choose either? Would you keep somebody else on the roster?
Yeah, I think Wooden's a little bit more expendable. I do think he has hit his ceiling. Mosby, I really liked, and I think him and Colin Oliver kind of probably the only two that kind of bring some decent speed off the edge too as well. So if I had to lean, it's not like one massive sway versus the other. It's Aaron Mosby. I kind of already seen, Wooden. I think he might have graded out total last year around a 50 or maybe a 50, 40, 54, 55 throughout the whole year. Just not that good. There's no way he's getting in over a Brinson or a Stackhouse. Specifically, somebody's got to play that 0 or 1 tech kind of position there over the center or even a shade off of it. So if I had to lean, I'm going slightly towards Aaron Mosby, but I don't think I would be shocked if they didn't keep either of them though as well.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, I like Aaron Mosby, and he's going to be a very interesting thing. I'm with you on Wooden. I think he was a interesting tweener draft pick to begin with. He's not really a true edge player in this system, and remember, he was drafted in Joe Barry's era. So, I just think that he's going to be on the outside looking in. With the depth they've added, he's going into a contract year anyways, and you're probably not going to re-sign him next year. So you've seen 3 years of Colby Wooden as a late draft pick, and his time in Green Bay just might be coming to an end. In this case, if we start to play the numbers game, I'm not sure that we are going to keep either of them, and I think there's a strong chance that Aaron Mosby ends up back on the practice squad. Technically, they could offer Wood in that spot too, but I do think that there's going to be another defensive line needy team that will take a chance on a guy like Colby Wooden and bringing him in as a former 5th-round pick to see what he can get. So let's just play this numbers game a little bit and see where we land. We've settled on the offensive line. We've settled that it sounds to me, Rob, and let me know if I didn't hear this right, but we both agree that we're going to pass on Wooden and Mosby. So we're keeping 5 defensive tackles and
Correct.
5 edge players right now.
Yep.
We've already kind of settled on our linebackers, corners, secondary pieces, so we don't have to have discussion there. We have to go back to the running back wide receiver conversation though. So to figure out what our grand total will be to get to 53. That did not work out. So running back, are we going to keep Emmanuel Wilson or Chris Brooks if you have to choose one of those guys right now?
Man, that's tough. Man, I really love from what Emmanuel Wilson did, but if I'm considering in here that Marshawn Lloyd is going to be healthy and ready to contribute this year, I would probably keep in Chris Brooks, who also did a lot of really great things last year. So I know there might be some heated conversation on that. Totally justifiable, right? Emmanuel Wilson is definitely deserving of one of these spots. You could argue for and for against, but I'm going to say Chris Brooks, Marshawn Lloyd, and Josh Jacobs.
I just think there's too much value. I really think that they might try to keep 4 running backs here, which really sounds crazy. But I think that they really like Chris Brooks' special teams. So let's play this game. If we kept both of those players, so that's 4 running backs. I think that means that we can only keep 6 wide receivers then at that point in time. And remember, we're going to get Christian Watson back later in the season, and there's going to be an injury at some point in time. So at that point in time, if you haven't made a Romeo Doubs trade or whatever, like we talked at the beginning of the show, you're really adding a 7th wide receiver into the mix if everybody's healthy. Of course, not everybody's going to be healthy. So, maybe Chris Brooks has found his way to the IR, and then, Christian Watson just comes in and takes his place at that point in time. So You and I could battle this out about Hardman and Melton and Heath.
I
But, after our discussion, you got to keep one of these guys. Are you still on the Hardman train?
I am still riding hard on the Hardman train. Yes, yes, that's the way I go. I could totally see it your way too. You had a very good argument, and good data to pull that off. So I mean, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Like pick one, could be the other. You know
Yeah.
how we kind of both feel about it. So
So for the sake of this, because we're not going to have like a 5-minute duke it out on air, we should have settled this off air. But so you've heard both of our points. For the sake of this exercise, I said we're keeping 4 running backs. Rob's going to pick the wide receiver. He's keeping McCole Hardman. If I had to pick one of those guys to keep, I think I would probably keep Bo Melton, because you're hoping that Savion Williams is that blocking guy that Malik Heath can be. I'm also keeping Bo Melton, in my opinion, because Bo Melton can be a rosterable player for the Packers next year. He's under contract as an exclusive rights free agent. So if you do let Doubs and Christian Watson go to the free agent market and don't plan to re-sign them, your 2026 room right now would look like Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, Matthew Golden, Savion Williams, and Bo Melton. So you'd be returning 5 guys there if you kept Melton. Not to say you couldn't re-sign Hardman, but he's on a 1-year deal.
yeah, and you know what? This is really good conversation, right? This is just two best friends kind of going at it. Let us know in the comments what you guys think. We want to know what side of the coin that you guys would pick to as well.
Settle that score for us. That'll be a good discussion. We should have mentioned this earlier too. It's small news, but kind of big in the grand scheme of things. Tyler Elgersma, he did get signed after the mini camp. So he did fill that final roster spot. He's going to be around during training camp and have a chance to compete with Sean Clifford for that third quarterback position. That's what we got for you, Rob, or that's what we got for you folks on today's show. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Clearly, this will not be the last time we are going to revisit this. I'm sure that we will revisit it at least once after a few weeks of training camp, and then we will make our final 53-man roster prediction a couple days before the Packers actually make those decisions, and we'll see, how right we were along the way here. But our opinion will certainly be changed on 1 or 2 of these players depending on how things go this offseason.
Well, yeah, we appreciate it, Packers fans. As always, we had a lot of really good conversation back and forth, some really good arguments too as well. I'm sure you guys find this very familiar, whether you're talking with your best friends or a family member or whatever it is. So if you have any sort of ideas or conversation maybe we missed, or maybe some certain points or reflections on this, please let us know in the comments. We are very happy to engage with you. Just know that we do have new content every Wednesday and Saturday on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. So please make sure to hit the like button, sub, and follow us. We would greatly appreciate it. We are on X as well. I am at Sounds Gouda, and Jordan is at Olson Jordan. But as always, Packers fans, thank you for coming back and taking a listen to us. We hope that you have a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good night. Take care. Go Pack Go.
Been wanted this shit forever. I've been in the field with whatever they throw at me. Brush it off, pick myself up, moving on to the better. Okay. Hey.